Mbewe.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu.
Benin's special prosecutor is reportedly preparing to file an extradition request for prominent Pan-African and anti-Western activist Kémi Séba, who was arrested last week by South African police in Pretoria. He is wanted in Benin on charges of inciting rebellion after allegedly supporting a failed coup attempt in December. Séba briefly appeared in a Pretoria court on Monday, where he was remanded in custody pending a bail hearing scheduled for the 29th of April. For more on this, we are joined on the line by Chris Maroleng, the CEO of Africa 360 Advisory. Chris, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu. Thank you for having me on your program.
Now, Chris, many people see this as just a legal issue involving a controversial figure. Why are you saying it's bigger than that? And who is Kémi Séba, and how is he involved in the said failed coup attempt in December?
Well, it's a very detailed question that I'm going to, or rather a response that I'm going to give you, and it stems from a deep understanding of what's going on in the West African region, in particular around the economic community of West African states, where we have seen, especially in the Sahel region, a spate of unconstitutional changes of power and challenges to the sovereignty and the democratic dispensations that have prevailed in that country. And this has mainly been due to the fact that economic pressures, a lack of trust in governance institutions in that region has seen the military filling in that vacuum because of a lack of trust in conventional governance mechanisms. And therefore, people like Kémi Séba have filled that vacuum, arguing that they are Pan-Africanists, incorrectly so, and that they represent a more progressive approach towards governance, which we argue is not the case, because what they actually are doing are they're creating greater instability and encouraging unconstitutional changes of power that don't occur at the election or polls in West Africa, but are led through the barrel of the gun.
Now, with Benin's special prosecutor, he's set to be preparing an extradition request for Séba. And given that the authorities in Benin have linked him to backing a foiled coup, how seriously should such allegations be taken in assessing extradition?
Well, these allegations are at the top of the mind of prosecutors and those involved in the extradition hearing, because I'll remind you that Kémi Séba is accused to have been involved in a 2005 coup that was attempted in Benin. But more importantly, he's also been involved with other extremist elements in Benin who have been trying to topple the legally elected government of that country. We also need to understand that we have seen, interestingly enough, Kémi Séba being arrested here in South Africa and linked during his arrest to an extremist group in South Africa that is linked to white extremists who are claiming that they did genocide and basically unfair treatment of the mainly Afrikaner Boer community in South Africa. So the extradition hearing, in essence, is going to put forward, I believe, a case that presents Kémi as a threat to national security of Benin, and certainly because of his links to extremist groups and military organizations like the former military organization Wagner and the late Prigozhin of Russia, who have been involved in coups in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and also in Mali.
And how should South Africa balance its legal obligations with the risk of appearing to suppress dissenting political voices on the continent? And could this extradition request set a precedent for how African states handle cross-border political activism and dissent?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the key things is that South Africa has a very robust constitution and democratic dispensation. Similarly, too, does Benin. And I think that the rule of law and ultimately the provision of freedoms of expression, freedoms of association, which are guaranteed in the constitutions of both Benin and South Africa, will be the ultimate litmus test on what must happen to Kémi Séba in this extradition hearing. I believe that the South African government, because of the cooperation that exists between South Africa and, of course, Benin, our regions, the Southern African Development Community, the Economic Community of West African States, will be inclined to view the request for extradition, given the background and the destabilization that Kémi Séba has been involved in Benin, very seriously. And they are most likely to consider the fact that his presence in South Africa also represents the movement of this sentiment around destabilization, anti-democratic sentiment, questions of sovereignty as very concerning, and therefore requiring a serious review of these requests for extradition back to Benin.
And Chris, what should be the role of regional bodies like ECOWAS in cases such as these?
Well, the Economic Community of West African States is principally one that looks to integrate the economies of West African states. It also seeks, through collective security arrangements, to stabilize the region. This is very important given the unconstitutional changes of powers or changes of power and coups that have occurred, especially in the Sahel region. And therefore, the Economic Community of West African States would be interested in seeming to be active in trying to curb the activities of these unconstitutional change agents who are present in West Africa, who are trying to emulate some of the coups that have occurred, especially in the Sahel region.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We have run out of time and are going to leave it there for today.
Thank you very much for having me on your program.
That was Chris Maroleng, the CEO of Africa 360 Advisory, joining us on the line. It is 29 after